Hello, welcome to part two of our discussion with Walter Block, and we are defending Israel. So, in part one, I ended the conversation by talking about the Jewish question. But before I continue with that aspect of the debate, we are still responding to some of the arguments of your critics because I'm facilitating a mini debate on the show by sharing their arguments, although they're not responding. So, in the same article written by Thomas Di Lorenzo, he notes Walter's fangs really come out in another column entitled No More Pauses. This time, he criticizes the Israeli government for agreeing to a humanitarian pause in all the bombing and killing. He praises the actions of the US military in World War II in not pausing but firebombing civilian populated Germany. I think this is an important critique. How do you respond?
Well, I didn't praise. Notice he doesn't quote me. He just says what I said. But, if I'm going to criticize you, Lipton, I'm going to read your article and I'm going to quote you. And I say, Lipton says this, and this is exactly what Lipton says. And here are 5 reasons why Lipton is wrong. That's the scholarly way. And if you're criticizing me, you'll do roughly the same thing. You'll quote me and say, here are 6 reasons why Walter is wrong. Fine. He doesn't do that. He just ascribes views to me that I don't hold, and these are straw men. And then he criticizes what he ascribes to me falsely. I never said that it was justified to bomb civilians in Dresden at the end of World War II. I never said that. He doesn't quote me as saying that, and he doesn't give any source for me saying that, which he couldn't because I never said that, and I never wrote that. So this is highly problematic, to be polite. This is not good scholarship, and I'm shocked. I mean, he is a many-time co-author of mine. We must have written 4 or 5 articles together, and we have an entire book that we're co-authors. I thought he was a good scholar. This is not scholarship. This is highly problematic, to be polite. I never said, I never wrote that it was justified for the US to bomb the civilians in Dresden. Never. And he says that I did, and it was wrong, and I agree with him. It was wrong, but I didn't say it.
All right. So I've read Thomas Di Lorenzo. I like his work on reconstruction, but let's continue with another argument because we want to be as serious as we possibly can. In yet another article entitled Backstabbing Israel, Walter is concerned with a different type of pause. This time, he complains bitterly about the Biden administration's pause in sending more bombs to Israel to be dropped on the Gazan population, calling it treachery. He therefore is fully in favor of using the US government's power of legalized theft to pay for more bombs for Israel. This alone should disqualify him as a libertarian, no matter how many micro-libertarian articles or blogs about the old days of libertarian meetings he posts on the internet in the future.
First of all, let me just say I'm delighted with you, Lipton. You are engaging, I won't say surreptitiously, but you are engaging in the debate that I want to have with him. He won't debate me. I have challenged him to a debate. He has not even condescended to reply to me saying he doesn't want to debate, just doesn't reply. So I thank you for giving me this opportunity to indirectly debate him. Now, I want to make 2 points. The first point about is this micro and macro libertarianism. This was a point made by Ryan McMakin, also of the Mises Institute,
Yes.
and a colleague of Tom Di Lorenzo and mine when I was a senior fellow there. So what is micro libertarianism? Micro libertarianism is issues about which all libertarians agree. We shouldn't have rent control. We shouldn't have the minimum wage. We should have free trade. We should not be putting homosexuals in jail for adult consensual behavior. And the same with prostitutes. These are issues where Ryan McMakin and Tom DiLorenzo are willing to credit me for being a good libertarian. So that's micro-libertarianism. What is macro-libertarianism? Macro-libertarianism is more complicated issues. And the main one that they're talking about is war. But there are others. There are other macro-libertarian issues, and they're defined as issues where libertarians disagree. For example, abortion. Now, you can't get two more highly credentialed libertarians than Murray Rothbard and Ron Paul. No one would disagree with me on that. Nobody. And yet, Ron Paul is pro-life and Murray Rothbard is pro-choice. They are 180 degrees apart from each other. And this is a macro libertarian issue because libertarians are divided. Another one is immigration. Another one is voluntary slavery. Another one is reparations to Black people for the slavery of their great-grandparents. There are other macro libertarian issues. And what my critics are saying is that I'm okay. No, I'm even pretty good or very good on micro libertarian issues, but on macro libertarian issues, which are maybe more important, I'm out to lunch, or I'm just totally fallacious. I reject this. I think that I'm a libertarian on all issues, and the only thing we disagree on war, as I said in part one, is not that we're against war. And I have another article which I just published saying that antiwar.com is misnamed, and Lew Rockwell advertises himself, his blog, as, what is it, anti-war, pro-peace, anti-state. And I say, no, we're not anti-war. We're only anti-offensive war. We're pro-defensive war. And the big issue here is who is offensive and who is defensive. And there we certainly disagree. Okay, now let's get to the other point that you just made. Do I favor Israel giving bombs to Israel in order to drop them on Gaza? Well, I think it is traitorous because, as I mentioned in part one, the U.S. gives more foreign aid, apologies to Peter Bauer, more foreign aid to all the Arab countries put together than the one country, Israel, even though it gives more to that one country than to any other single country. But all of the Israelis' enemies are given more foreign aid than Israel itself. And this has got some problems, one, because of this bifurcation, and two, because Israel is hardly an independent entity when it's so dependent, and it's forced to fight with one hand tied behind his back. Now, look, it's one thing to cut off foreign aid. Fine, cut off all foreign aid. But don't just cut off Israeli foreign aid because they went to Rafah, because they're pursuing all these red lines, because they're pursuing Hamas fully. And it's quite another thing right in the middle when this aid has been promised to cut it off because they don't like the way that Israel is pursuing the war. So yes, I think that Biden was in the wrong for threatening Israel and then following through on his threat, because this was promised. This was almost contractual to the extent that you can have contracts, legitimate contracts between government entities, which you can't, but that's a very technical issue. So yes, I stand by my claim that Biden was wrong in cutting back very quickly without any advance warning. Well, he did give advance warning. I take that back, but he was wrong in giving advance warning. He should not have violated his not legal, well, maybe legal, but certainly moral obligations to supply Israel with these arms.
And your article, Invade Rafah Now, that also courted controversy. Walter complained about the delay in the bombing of Rafah by once again blaming the Biden administration that had brought up the possibility of massive civilian deaths. He admits that an all-out invasion which spelled the death of many of the 1.5 million civilians in Rafah, but then nonchalantly moves on from that by once again condemning the Biden administration by saying, with friends like these, who needs enemies? To Walter Block, those Americans who are opposed to the additional killing of civilians in Rafah are enemies.
Look, if you're against killing civilians in Gaza, you're against Israel defending themselves, because the only way they can defend themselves is to conquer Hamas. And the only way they can conquer Hamas is by killing innocent civilians. Why? Because Hamas uses those innocent civilians. They embed themselves in the civilian population. They use them as shields. And I don't want to repeat myself, but I'll repeat myself from part one. If I attack you, Lipton, with my knife here, it's actually a pen, and this is Adam Smith, and I'm going to kill you. You have two choices. You can't run away by stipulation, and you have a gun, and you can either let me kill you, in which case you're a pacifist, and I think you're being unjust, or you can shoot me, which I think is just. But if you shoot me, you have to go through Adam Smith, who is an innocent person. So yes, Israel was entitled to use bombs, whether it's own bombs or bombs from Russia or bombs from the United States or rockets or whatever to conquer Hamas. And this necessarily implies collateral damage. And the collateral damage is the fault of Hamas, just as this damage is not your fault, it's my fault. I'm the aggressor here. I am threatening to attack you with my pen knife here, my knife, and you're entirely justified to shoot me. And if you do, you will have collateral damage. And if your bullets came from the United States and they were promised to you before, I think you would be entirely justified in using those bullets against me.
So, Walter, are you saying that killing civilians is a vehicle for Israel to be successful because of the actions of Hamas? Because Hamas is using people as human shields. So one way to defeat Hamas is to indirectly or directly kill civilians.
The only way, not just one way, the only way to defeat Hamas is to kill innocent civilians. Israel does everything it can to reduce the incidence of killing innocent civilians. It drops leaflets on hospitals and on schools where Hamas has placed rocket launchers. And it says, we are going to bomb this place, get out. How many leaflets has Hamas dropped? None. So who is concerned about saving innocent civilians, Hamas or Israel? The one who dropped leaflets is the one who is concerned about killing innocent people, collateral damage. And that is Israel. Hamas never heard of they've heard of the idea of dropping leaflets, but they never dropped any leaflets. On October 7th, they purposely attacked innocent civilians. Israel never did that. Israel doesn't rape any Gazan women. The Gazans, the Hamas, does rape Israeli women. And then, I think Tom DiLorenzo or Hans Hoppe says, well, there was only one Israeli baby who was shot, which is nonsense. And then they say he was shot in a crossfire. Well, who started the crossfire? Why was there a necessity for a crossfire in the first place? The reason that there was a necessity for a crossfire is because Hamas invaded Israel on October 7th. Israel didn't invade Gaza on October 7th. On October 8th, yes. And by the way, on October 8th, what did you have? 33 or 31 Harvard University student groups saying that the invasion of yesterday, namely October 7th, was Israel's fault. I mean, you have to be, I don't know what, low IQ or something crazy to think that October 7th was Israel's fault.
As I said before, I'm really impartial. I look at both sides and I point out the defects in the respective argument. So for instance, the argument about Hamas killing babies and the beheading of babies. I don't like Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist group. But that argument is nonsense. So on both sides, I debunk the conspiracies. I don't have time for nonsense any at all.
Well,
If
I'm
I
like you. I'm
Yeah,
like you.
yeah. Yes, I'm pro-Israel. I really don't like Hamas. I'm a critic of Islamic philosophy. But if the literature on Hamas is incredulous, that's what I'm going to say. I'm not going to praise it because I'm pro-Israel.
I'm like you. You and I are similar. I criticize both sides. You can readily see how I criticize Hamas. How do I criticize Israel? I say Israel is too socialistic. I say Israel did not pursue Hamas as assiduously as I would like them to. I would say that they paused too much, that they gave too much food and electricity and water to the Gazans. I say they didn't go into Rafah soon enough. They paused too much. So I'm critical of Israel.
But some people would say that your criticisms of Israel are premised on Israel not being aggressive enough in pursuing Hamas. Therefore, if one is arguing that Israel is perpetuating genocide, your criticisms justify those arguments. So people will invoke your criticism to say, look, that's evidence that Walter Block is perpetuating genocide because he wants idiots to assiduously pursue Hamas. So that argument will be used against you. Your critics will weaponize it.
Well, I don't care if they use arguments against me or not. I'm after the truth. And the truth is that there is good criticism of Israel. They don't fight hard enough. They are too soft on Hamas. They're too socialist. And if people criticize me on that, best defense is the truth. And the
Yes.
truth of the matter is that Israel should fight harder.
Israel should be more belligerent.
More military. Yes. You know, nowadays they say that what is it? Israel shouldn't be pursuing Hamas as strongly as they can because young 12-year-old boys in Gaza will hate Israel. And when they become 18 in 6 years, they will start another October 7th. And therefore, Israel shouldn't pursue them as harshly as it is. And I say this is nonsense. I mean, should the cops not stop a rapist who is 18 years old because his 12-year-old brother will resent the cops for stopping his 18-year-old brother who is a rapist or a murderer? No, that's not the way the economics of crime works. The way the economics of crime works, and my mentors here, Gary Becker, my dissertation advisor at Columbia for my PhD, the harsher the penalty, the less likely the crime will be pursued. So my view on that is, if you pursue the big brother of this 12-year-old Gazan kid harshly, well, then the 12-year-old kid will deduce from that he better not mess with Israel because Israel is going to kick his butt, just like it kicked his big brother's butt. Whereas the opposite view is you're afraid of the next generation, so you shouldn't defend yourself against this generation. That is a recipe for suicide. And I'm not in favor of Israeli suicide.
Let me cite some data emanating from JNS. So JNS, the Jewish News Syndicate, wrote an article, defeating genocidal Hamas is noble, not genocide. Citing data now. Israel has made extraordinary efforts to avoid collateral damage. It has made massive use of phone calls to civilians in combat areas to leave. 19,734 SMS texts and almost 6 million pre-recorded calls. Israel also dropped more than 520,000 flyers and has distributed military maps and urban warfare graphics to assist civilians as to where it was safe. As Spencer noted, John Spencer, no military history has ever done this. Israel warned prospective victims to anticipate attacks in order to avert fatalities. That should disabuse people of the notion that Israel is committing genocide.
Absolutely. This is, I wish I had written that. And if I believed in plagiarism, well, I probably have written that. Not in those words, but I don't know. Since my book with Alan Fuderman in 2021, I must have written 100 articles, many in the Wall Street Journal and in Hayam, an Israeli place, and I've said that. I've tried to say that. Now these people said it brilliantly, and I wish I could say it as well. But I do my level best to say exactly that.
Yes.
If there's any genocide, it's on the part of Hamas. And there is genocide on the part of Hamas. When you purposely aim at civilians, at women and children, and you rape them, that's genocide. Now, I never wrote about beheadings. I don't know whether it's true or not. I suspect it is true, but I don't know that it is true. So I can't be responsible for saying that because I never said it. But I did say that children have been killed by Hamas, and Hans Hoppe said, and Tom DeLuca said, only one Israeli child. This is just nonsense. It's a lie. It's a falsehood. And then they said, well, it was all due to what do you call it? Crossfire. Well, who started the crossfire?
No, some people say that there should be a ceasefire. That's the current argument. That there should be a ceasefire. But again, a counter argument is this. Was there a ceasefire before October 7th? If there was a ceasefire before October 7th, then who disrupted it?
They don't respect ceasefires. They don't respect the treaties. Yes, there should be a ceasefire right now as soon as Hamas surrenders and gives up all of its hostages. Otherwise, there shouldn't be a ceasefire. They should conquer them. Because the covenant of Hamas is kill all Jews. How even Bernie Sanders, who is no libertarian, who is no right winger, even he, by the way, he was a high school schoolmate of mine. We were on the track team together, sort of buddies. Even he said we can't deal with Hamas because Hamas has in its covenant the idea we kill all Jews. Now, how are you going to make a deal with people that want to kill you?
Yeah, Hamas is not a reasonable actor.
That's right. I agree.
Yeah, Hamas is a business. It's a mafia that pilfers funds with its webs everywhere. So it was recently reported that a journalist was also holding hostages. He was killed. The journalist apparently was killed. But Hamas is an intricate network with spies everywhere.
Hamas is a criminal organization. Hamas is a terrorist group. Hamas should be conquered. And yes, when Hamas is conquered, there should be a ceasefire. Look, 1 minute after Hamas surrendered, there'd be no more killing of any Gazan civilians. If Hamas was interested in saving civilian lives, they would surrender. Given that they're not surrendering, and they're still sending rockets into Israel. Even now, they're still sending rockets into Israel. Even now, they still have hostages, some of whom have died already. This is a criminal organization. You don't make pauses with. Do the cops make a pause with the rapists? Do the police have a ceasefire with murderers? No. Any police that has a ceasefire with murderers, they shouldn't be police. Any police that has a pause with rapists shouldn't be police. The police should stop rapists and murderers, and Israeli IDF should stop Hamas and no pauses and no ceasefires until they stop them.
No, negotiating with criminals is a passport to failure and decadence. So in Jamaica, one politician, she negotiated with criminals. Negotiating with criminals does not solve the problem of crime and delinquency. You have to arrest criminals. That's why, even though I'm a libertarian, I'm a realist, I don't have a problem with building prisons. The state, if the state must have any function, any at all, it should be to build penal institutions because we have to get rid of antisocial characters.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yes. So you can't negotiate with criminals. That's a recipe for constructing a banana republic. That's why Jamaica is Jamaica and America is America. America locks up criminals.
The problem with you, Lipton, is we haven't co-authored enough articles.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
We now have to co-author another article on
Yes.
cops and robbers.
I do agree. So in your response to up, there is a sentence which I find interesting. I like it. It's published in the Mess Journal. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, this is it. Israel is guilty of ethnic cleansing and apartheid, etc. We also discuss genocide, so I don't need to rush that again. But apartheid, is Israel an apartheid state?
Well, South Africa, which is the world's leading expert in apartheid, has just sent a complaint to the World Court saying Israel is guilty of apartheid. Now, look, in Israel, 20% of the population is Arab, Druze, Christian, 20% is non-Jewish, mostly Arab. And these Arabs are policemen. They are IDF soldiers. They are judges. They are doctors. They are professors in the universities of Israel. How is that apartheid? They even have a political party. Before Likud, they're not in power now. They're in the Knesset, but before the Likud took over, they were in the governing coalition. There were 4 different Arab parties. I don't remember the names of them, and they coalesced into one Arab party, and they were part of the liberal government. That's apartheid. That's not apartheid the way the South Africans did it. In South Africa, under apartheid, there were no black judges or black, I don't know, politicians that were in office or anything like that. So the idea of apartheid and ethnic cleansing is just silly.
Well, according to the latest legal research I have read by Robert Ash and Jay Sikulo, so Israel is not an apartheid state. This was published last year, date written, posted. I read it some time ago. I read it several months ago. I read this article. Israel is not an apartheid state. And I've read several articles on the topic, and there is an academic article asserting that experts went to South Africa. No, sorry. Experts from South Africa went to Israel to study the social organization of Israel. These experts concluded that Israel is not an apartheid state.
Absolutely.
And they were in South Africa. South Africa was an actual apartheid state.
South Africa was. Israel is not. I mean, when you have 20% of the people that are not Jews, and these 20% of the people are respected, and they have they become engineers and scientists and judges and policemen and politicians that are even in the Knesset. I mean, it's just silly.
And there's also the contention that Israel is encroaching on Palestinian lands.
Now, that's an important point.
Yes.
That's a very, very important point. And there are 2 arguments against it. You see, what Hans Hoppe does and what Tom DiLorenzo do is they look at the Israeli claims for land and they say they're imperfect. And therefore, the Arabs should own that land. Now, that's not the right way to do it. The right way to do it is to say, yes, the Israeli claims to land are imperfect, and so are the Arab claims to land imperfect. And now, which is better? And they don't do that. They just say that the land, the claim to land on the Israeli or the Jewish part is imperfect. Well, of course it's imperfect. They're human beings. Nothing that we do is ever perfect, except this interview. I'm kidding. This interview is not perfect. Nothing is perfect.
Nothing is perfect, but this is a fairly good interview because I'm not a polemical person. I prefer substance to style. It's not impossible to interview somebody without bashing anybody at all. I don't have time for deprecating people. That's just not me.
Well, look, there are two claims as to why the Israeli land titles are better. One is 2,000 years ago. The Jews, by the way, the Jews are, I think, 4,000 years old, something like that, or 5,000 years old, whereas the Islam people are only 1,400 years old. The Jews were there first, and part of libertarian John Lockean theory of just titles to property is who was there first? Who, what's the word? Homesteaded the land.
Yes,
Who
homesteaded.
mixed their labor with the land first? Well, if one group was there 5,000 or 4,000 years ago, and the other group was there 1,400 years ago, the presumption is that the people who were there first homesteaded the land under contention. The second point is there is no statutory limit.
Statute of limitation. Yes.
There is a natural statutory limitation, but the point is possession is 9/10 of the law. Whoever owns the land now is presumed to be the rightful owner, and anyone who doesn't like it, the plaintiff, the burden of proof is on him to prove that the extant owner doesn't own it. Well, now let's take the Second Temple and the mosque right in the middle of Israel, of Jerusalem. Which is above which? Is the mosque on top of the Second Temple, or is the Second Temple on top of the mosque? It's the Second Temple that's below and the mosque that's on top. Well, which came first? What's below or on top? Obviously, what's below came first. The Cohens trace their ownership of the Second Temple way before the mosque was built. Now, the mosque is a holy site for the Muslims, but the Israelis were there first. So that's one bit of evidence that from 2,000 years ago, or 5,000 years ago. Another bit of evidence comes from 100 years ago or 50 years ago. A lot of Jews bought land from Arabs, but they did so under Turkish rule. Why under Turkish rule? Because the Turks were ruling. And the only way to buy anything and transfer land titles was under Turkish or Ottoman rule. And people say, well, this is illegitimate. But which is more illegitimate? The Turkish?
Question, Walter. How did Jewish people acquire land? Many of them acquired land because the sale of land was facilitated by Arab elites. Arab elites facilitated the sale of land. Arab elites who had no interest in ordinary people or who really didn't care much about establishing a state facilitated the sale of land. People never say that the Palestinians are the descendants of recent immigrants or people who lived under the Ottoman Empire who were never rebellious. Palestinian identity is really recent.
That's right. That's right. You see,
they were never rebellious under the Ottoman Empire.
Absolutely. See, the point I would make that I would emphasize is a lot of the Arab lands, so-called Arab lands, were a desert or swamp, and they were considered not only uncultivated but uncultivatable. And when you have land that is not cultivated, it's not homesteaded, and therefore the claim that they have to that land is very weak. Let me put it that way. Whereas the Jews had better technology, they could make the desert bloom. They could get into these swamplands and these desert lands and homestead them. And therefore, they have a better claim to those lands. Now, there's another issue that in 1948, what happened was a whole bunch, maybe 1 million Palestinians left. Why did they leave? Because the war of 1948 was starting, and many of them were scared. They don't want to be, if there's a war occurring in Jamaica, you might leave because you don't want to be involved in a war. So a lot of Palestinians left. Some of them left because they were scared. Others of them left because the 7 invading armies sent out messages to them saying, look, we want to obliterate all the Jews, but if you're there, it's going to be harder to get rid of the Jews. So go away for a week or two, we'll kill all the Jews, and then you come back. Well, what happened was the war went the other way, and then they wanted to have the right of return. Now, at the same time, roughly within a couple of weeks, there were a similar number of Jews who were kicked out of Egypt and Syria and Iraq and many of the other surrounding Arab countries. And there was no right of return for them. They couldn't return because if they returned, they'd be killed. So what might have happened.
Do you have time to do a part 3?
Well, not today.
Okay, so you have to wrap up then. You have to wrap up because we have less than 1 minute left, so I have to say bye.
Okay, look, I'd like to do part 3, but I'd like to invite Alan Fuderman,
okay,
my co-author. Yeah. So let me just wrap up and say
all
that
right. I have to say it bye because we're the less than 1 minute, so I have to go.
Okay, well, we're wrapping up. Let me thank you for having me for part 2. It's a great joy, and I look forward to part 3 with Alan Fuderman as well.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Take care. Bye.